Hello everyone, a very good morning and welcome to Byju's Exam Prep. Welcome to another session on disaster management. Yesterday we had the first class on disaster management and we covered many important topics. We covered few basic introductory concepts and we understood important terminologies like what is a disaster, what is a hazard, what are the different types of hazards we have. We even spoke about the concept of vulnerability and disaster risk. Then we studied India's vulnerability to disasters. We also spoke about the disaster management cycle and how the disaster management approach has changed over the last few decades. Then we started talking about different types of disasters. We started with floods. We had covered everything about floods, and we were left with the last discussion on flood management. We have to understand how disaster management applies for floods, or how do we deal with this particular hazard to minimize loss of life and the damage caused by the disaster. So let's cover this topic and then move on to the other disasters. See, with regard to floods, as we discussed yesterday, it is possible to provide early warning and forecasting. So to be able to provide early warning, first of all, you need to carry out a thorough risk analysis as part of your pre-disaster planning and preparedness, which is the first step in the disaster management cycle. You need to understand the risk. You need to study the hazard, understand the hazard and the risk, and create a hazard vulnerability profile of the country. Remember, yesterday I showed you a map of India pointing out which regions, which river basins are prone to flooding. This exercise is essentially a risk analysis exercise. You're essentially understanding the disaster risk associated with floods in India. So, this requires thorough scientific studies and assessments through which you can create the hazard vulnerability profile for the country. So, based on this, you can understand the risk, you know which areas are more prone, and accordingly, you need to step up your early warning forecasting systems. So, these are the basic steps under the pre disaster phase: risk analysis and early warning and forecasting. Once these technologies are in place to provide real time alerts, right, you can forecast heavy rainfall, potential cloudburst events. You're monitoring the water levels in rivers and in important lakes and dams. So, this system helps in giving out real time alerts. Now, once you're able to generate early warning, next it's about disseminating the alert. You need to send the alert to all the concerned people. The alert has to be sent in real time to the concerned authorities, to the media, and even to the public. Because communicating the alert is very important. Now, what's the point if IMD determines that heavy rainfall is going to occur, but if IMD does not have the methods to communicate that, right? Imagine Central Water Commission, it is tracking the flood levels, it realizes a flood is about to happen, but if it doesn't have the mechanisms to communicate the alert, then your whole early warning system will collapse. So, disseminating the alert, sending the alert across to all the stakeholders is very, very important. So, from the central government, the NDMA, Home Ministry, all the concerned ministries, the concerned state governments and district authorities, the disaster response forces, they should all be intimidated immediately about the impending disaster. Correct? The media should be brought on board. The authorities have to engage the internet and social media as well to spread the message as far and wide as possible. The message should reach the people who are in the line of the disaster. Correct? So, what we do is there are various methods through which the alerts are disseminated. Within the government, there is a well established communication structure with regard to sending these alerts out. And even with the media, there is an effective communication strategy, right? Even social media is engaged. And even The telecom service providers are engaged to send out messages to the alert areas, to the disaster prone areas, especially with regard to the east coast of India, which is very prone to cyclones and tsunamis, right? We already have a system in place where there is a SMS blast, a message blast is sent out through the telecom service providers. All the mobile phones in that area, in the affected area, right, they will all get a message saying that a disaster is about to happen, you need to evacuate. So we are fine tuning these systems. Of course, it's still not countrywide operational, but we are trying to put in place an effective communication system as well, through which we can reach out to every stakeholder and communicate the alert. Next, what else can we do in the pre-disaster phase? What else can we plan for? What else can we prepare for? We can plan and prepare for reducing the surface runoff. What is surface runoff? It is the velocity with which the water is flowing. You can arrest the velocity of water flow. Correct? The rate at which water is flowing on the surface can be arrested through various methods. One of the natural methods is by promoting afforestation. It also means you need to counter deforestation. This is a very, very important step, because the tree cover that is present on the surface, it acts as a natural barrier, a natural defense against the fast flow of water. The vegetative cover, the vegetation cover breaks the speed at which water is flowing, right? The roots, they provide more integrity, structure to the soil. They hold the soil together and prevent landslides from happening. The cascading effect can be minimized. So we have to tackle deforestation and promote afforestation. Then we need to take some structural measures as well to reduce the velocity. There are some structural measures we can take up where you can divert the flood water. It means you have to build few structures, you have to construct few facilities through which the flood water can be diverted in order to prevent the flooding of the low-lying area. So we can construct embankments, dams, canals, put up barriers where necessary, and divert this water, which can be collected in reservoirs, canals, and embankments. So this management of water, the way in which you manage the flow and utilization of water in a given drainage basin, is known as watershed management. We call this watershed management. In a particular river basin, now let's say we take the Krishna river basin, right? In that entire catchment area, apart from the main Krishna river, there will be other tributaries, there will be other water bodies and streams which are feeding into the Krishna. So how you are going to manage these water bodies? How will you manage the flow of water in that entire basin? How will you utilize the water? How will you conserve the water? All these measures regarding water management, they're part of your integrated watershed management. Is that clear? So at the state government, you have the irrigation and water department. At the central level, you have the Jal Shakti ministry, right? So it is their task to provide for effective water management. Is that clear? You can divert the flood waters by building these essential structures. Even before the disasters happen, in the pre-disaster phase, you can plan and prepare accordingly and provide for diversion of flood waters. Next, we can take up few non-structural measures. Non-structural measures where you don't have to build anything, but you can come out with policies. You can come out with regulations. This is what you mean by non-structural measures. All right, in disaster management, there are structural and non-structural measures. When we say structural measures, it means you're building something, you're constructing something, you're putting up structures to prevent or mitigate the disaster from happening. All right. Whereas in non-structural measures, you're taking policy measures, you're bringing some regulations, some laws, so that you regulate the economic activity and the activity of humans so that the losses can be minimized. So, under non structural measures, one important measure is zoning. What do you mean by zoning? Zoning is nothing but land use planning. You implement zoning standards. You designate certain zones as hazard prone zones and you prohibit human activities in those zones, or at least you restrict and regulate human activities. In other areas, you can allow the construction, the urbanization to happen. So, determining how the land will be used, right, is part of the zoning policy or the land use planning policy. This is very, very critical in case of every single disaster. In case of every disaster, you can reduce the impact through zoning and land use planning, right? You can, the local authorities especially, they have a bigger role to play along with the state governments. They need to identify the hazard prone zones, mark the zones on the map, and restrict construction activity, restrict economic activities. For example, you can prohibit the construction of hotels and resorts and homestays right next to the riverbed. Correct? You need to specify at what distance can these facilities come up, these tourist facilities can come up. So, by maintaining a safe distance, you can cut down the impact of floods when the river is going to flood eventually, right? Similarly, you can regulate agricultural activities, you can regulate human settlements, you can regulate the cities, the towns that are going to develop through your land use planning, through your zoning standards. The problem is not just with coming out with policies and regulations, it's also about enforcement. Enforcement is the biggest challenge. See, in India, we have plenty of policies and regulations regarding land use planning, right? In every state, in every city, in every planning body, right? At the district level, we have these policies and regulations already in place. It's on paper. Problem is in enforcement. Enforcing it on the ground is where we are facing a challenge. Due to corruption in the system, there is a collusion, there is a nexus between the private industry, the real estate mafia, and the builders, right? With the politicians, government officials, your local municipal bodies, panchayats, even at the level of the state government. This corrupt nexus is leading to violation of these standards. This is what causes encroachment. These officials, politicians are colluding with the builders and the real estate industry, and they're allowing such construction to happen. Even though the law prohibits and restricts these activities, they are being approved, they are being legalized because of the corrupt nexus present at the ground level. So this hampers enforcement of the zoning standards. And later we complain that a disaster has affected so many people, right? We are building, we are encroaching on these riverbeds, riverbanks. And in rainy season, when the river floods, it's bound to flood, right? Then we complain that it's become a disaster. So this is where human activities have to be strictly restricted and regulated, at least in some zones. That is why zoning standards are very, very critical. Next, you have to conserve your natural buffers. See, nature is quite amazing. There are natural systems that helps in maintaining an equilibrium in our nature. For example, you have wetland ecosystems. You have your groundwater table, right? There will be several ponds and lakes where the excess water can be absorbed naturally. Is that clear? If the main river is going to flood, the excess spill out, which is happening, the spillover, right, which is coming out, it can be absorbed by the other buffers present in the catchment area. There will be wetlands, ponds, the water will percolate into the groundwater table. So this helps in dissipating the water. But again, the problem here is that we are destroying our natural buffers. We have occupied lakes. We have destroyed the ponds. Groundwater percolation is not happening due to concretization. due to rampant construction and urbanization. Wetland ecosystems again have been destroyed due to overexploitation and large scale human activity. So it's critical to protect and conserve your natural buffers. They act as a natural defense, a natural barrier against the impact of disasters. Next, you provide for risk transfer. Risk can be transferred, especially financial risk. Financial risk can be transferred. Now, what do you mean by this? See, when a disaster occurs, people, right, they lose their homes, they lose their property, they could lose their agricultural fields. So they suffer a lot of economic losses. Regular middle class families, lower middle class families, the poor people, they can't afford to rebuild their lives. It'll be a big struggle. Their lives would be uprooted. Now, how do you transfer their financial risk? How do you ensure someone else will handle their financial risk? Can someone tell me in the comments? Do you know how can financial risk be transferred? We deal with this in healthcare as well, right? Let's say you're hospitalized. Not everyone can bear the financial burden. Or even in case of accidents, motor vehicle accidents. So there is a way to transfer financial risk. Vishal has given the right answer. Very good. And even Himanshu. The correct answer is insurance. See, insurance companies, private insurance companies, they don't usually cover disasters. They treat it as an act of God and they don't provide insurance for that. But government can work with insurance companies, create a pool of funds and ensure that even disasters are covered under insurance. Is that clear? So that financial risk can be transferred. The community, the people need not face the impact, right? The financial system will take the risk because people would have paid the premiums. And the affected population, they can get immediate reimbursements for the losses that they have suffered. The government can announce a big compensation, right? Depending on what losses people have suffered, they can be compensated by the government as well. So transferring the financial risk is also important to minimize the economic losses. So all these steps that I have mentioned, they're all part of your pre-disaster planning and preparedness. You can't do this when the disaster is happening or after the disaster has happened. These steps have to be taken up constantly through your governance and administration. Even before the disaster can happen, the pre-disaster phase of planning and preparedness, that is where you implement these measures. Understood? The other steps are very simple. During disaster, what do you do? During disaster, when the floods are about to happen or when the floods have already started, you obviously focus on emergency relief and response. You need to have well-trained, well-equipped disaster management forces, right? Again, in the pre-disaster phase, you should have established those forces. They should be well-trained, well-equipped. You can't always rely on the armed forces to come to the rescue, right? The Army, Navy, Air Force, they will pitch in, they will supplement the resources if required. But you can't depend on the armed forces all the time, right? That is not their primary objective or primary responsibility. Even the paramilitary forces we have, you can't rely on them for disaster management all the time. You need professional, dedicated disaster response forces, which are very well trained, very well equipped. And India has done exactly the same. We have established a dedicated force called NDRF, the National Disaster Response Force. And similarly, at state level, we have established the State Disaster Response Forces. We will study about them in the last class. When we come to the disaster management architecture in India, there we will talk about the disaster response forces of India. So right now, please understand that when the disaster is about to happen or when it has already happened, you focus on emergency relief and response. You work on a war footing. Mobilize all your resources immediately to carry out search and rescue operations. These disaster response forces will have to save as many lives as possible, right? They need special equipment for that, special training for that. In case of floods, the response forces, they should be specialist swimmers and divers because most people in floods will die from drowning, right? They should have life jackets. They should have inflatable boats, motor boats, so they can navigate through the flood waters and search for people and rescue people, as many people as possible. They will also need maybe satellite images to identify the extent of damage, to look at people who are trapped. They will need access to drones, right? So such technology has to be deployed. It should be available in the hands of the disaster response forces. And once you save the people, you administer basic medical aid, right? You need to have medical units on standby, provide medical assistance, then provide the basic essentials to help the people live, sustain their life for at least few days. Provide them food, provide them shelter, provide them clothing. All the essentials will have to be supplied to them, right? So this is what you do during the disaster phase. Emergency relief and response, it has to be as effective as possible. Then comes your last phase in disaster management, the post disaster phase. In the post disaster phase, you obviously try to rehabilitate the people after a few days following the floods, right? People who have lost their homes, who have lost their livelihood, you need to rehabilitate them. You need to help them rebuild their lives, bring some normalcy back to the region. This effort might take many months, maybe even few years. But the government should not neglect or forget this region. We can't simply forget the disaster, right? We humans have a very short memory. See, these disasters, they dominate the headlines only for a few days. After that, everyone forgets about it. They move on with their regular lives. The same happens with governments as well. So paying constant attention, even after many months and many years after the disaster, is very, very important. Rehabilitating the people, reconstructing the infrastructure. Reconstruction is very crucial. Reconstruction of houses, reconstruction of public infrastructure. Let's say roads are damaged, railway lines are damaged, power cables are down, mobile internet connectivity is down. You need to restore everything. You need to reconstruct, rebuild everything back as quickly as possible and help the region in its recovery. Help in bringing normalcy back to the region as quickly as possible. So these are the broad measures you undertake as part of your disaster management. Is that clear? It covers all the phases of disaster management cycle, and it will help in preventing and mitigating the impact of disasters. Now, if you understood all these steps, it is more or less the same for every disaster. Is that clear? So today we'll be discussing many more disasters. Under every disaster, the measures, the approach is pretty much the same. There might be few changes here and there depending on the type of the disaster, but more or less the broad approach is exactly the same. From risk analysis to early warning to structural, non-structural measures, risk transfer, conservation of natural buffers, then during disaster and post-disaster phase. These measures are exactly going to be the same in every single disaster. Is that clear? So this completes my detailed discussion of floods and how we can deal with floods. So now let's move on to the next major disaster. We'll take up droughts. It's quite the opposite of floods, right? Rather the exact opposite of floods. If floods are caused by excess availability of water, droughts are caused by shortage of water. So let's understand what are droughts. What is its impact? A drought is essentially caused by below average precipitation. In a given region, if there is below average rainfall over a given period of time, then this could result in shortage of water. It causes water scarcity in a particular region, in the affected region. This water scarcity will affect human life. It will affect human activities. It will affect the environment as well. And it eventually turns into a major disaster. Is that clear? So droughts are a direct outcome of less rainfall. If rainfall is disturbed for some reason, right? There are some arid, semi-arid regions which don't receive enough rainfall. There are areas which get very good rainfall. But in any of these regions, you can witness a drought if there is below average rainfall. In a given season or over a period of few years, if rainfall is below average, this will lead to water scarcity. All your water bodies will start running out, from lakes to rivers to even to the groundwater table, right? They'll get exhausted. And this situation of extreme water scarcity causes a drought condition. You'll not have enough water to drink. You'll not have enough water for irrigation. You'll not have enough water for industrial activities and other basic economic activities, right? And even for ecological, environmental purposes, there won't be sufficient water left. So, such an event is called a drought. All right, this is a very basic definition that I've given you. Now, let's understand how you can identify a drought. Let's understand some unique aspects attached with a drought condition. See, right now we studied floods, correct? Floods, or let's say even cyclones or even earthquakes. You can perceive these disasters immediately as and when they are happening in the entire region and around the world, right? You can understand that such a disaster is happening over here in that particular place. Now, just few days back, there was an earthquake in Nepal, which also left some tremors towards northern India, right? I'm sure some of you would have read about it. So immediately you're aware that an earthquake has happened. Tomorrow, let's say a cyclone will hit east coast of India. Immediately you will get to know, even before the cyclone hits, right? Alerts are already given out, right? It will dominate the newspapers, the media. So you'll get to know that such a disaster is about to happen or it has already happened. Same with floods. The moment floods begin, everyone gets to know because you can perceive. These disasters are instantaneous disasters. They are violent and instantaneous disasters because they bring widespread destruction which is visible in front of your eyes. Earthquakes will flatten cities. Floods will uproot everything. Cyclones will also destroy everything. So you can see the physical damage, right? We humans, we rely on perception and we react to instantaneous things, things which are happening instantly and that too in front of our eyes. But drought is not like this. Droughts are not instantaneous. They are not violent. They are not physically destructive, or at least you don't see them immediately. You can't perceive that a disaster has started. Is that clear? This is where the real challenge lies. Drought is essentially a slow kill disaster. It's like slow poison. You won't even realize when the drought started, when it is going to end, which regions are affected. It's very, very difficult to quantify these parameters. You can do this very easily in case of instantaneous disasters like floods, cyclones, earthquakes, tsunamis. There you can easily measure, identify which regions are getting affected, at what time, when exactly was the region affected, how many people are affected, what is the actual destruction and impact that can be seen. Visually, you can perceive that. You can estimate the damage. But in case of droughts, it's not perceivable. It's a slow kill disaster. It's not an instantaneous disaster. It happens slowly over a period of time. So this is where the challenge lies. Is that clear? Drought is this temporary condition. It's a temporary aberration in the weather and climatic patterns of the region, which causes below average rainfall, leading to water scarcity. This shortage of water can be seen not just on the surface, but even in the atmosphere and even in your groundwater table. The water scarcity is not just on the surface, not just in your lakes, rivers, etc. Water shortage will be seen in the atmosphere. That is, moisture levels in the atmosphere will drop. The humidity level goes down. You'll witness very dry conditions. Groundwater table goes down. So, such a condition, which has a widespread impact on agriculture, on human lives, on animals, on the environment, right? This is called a drought. It's a temporary feature. It's not a permanent feature. It'll happen maybe for one season, maybe for 2 years, 3 years, or 4 years, right? It's not a permanent feature of a region, but it's a temporary condition. That's why droughts can occur anywhere, even in a in a region where good rainfall is received usually, even where you have dense forests, even there a drought condition can occur if there is shortage of rainfall for consecutive seasons. Understood? It can happen not just in arid and semi-arid regions. It can happen anywhere if there is a shortage of rainfall triggered by climatic and weather events. Whereas aridity, on the other hand, it's a permanent feature. Aridity is a permanent feature of climate. You take Rajasthan, for example. Rajasthan will remain arid for millions of years. Interior India, interior parts of India, interior Maharashtra, interior Karnataka, interior Telangana, right? These are permanently semi-arid regions. That will not change. Those are permanent features of climate. But drought is a temporary aberration in the climatic and weather pattern. Is that clear? Temporary changes happening in the climate could drive weather changes, causing shortage of rainfall, which leads to water scarcity in the atmosphere, in the soil, in the surface, and also below the surface. So such a condition is called a drought. So compared to other disasters, droughts are extremely harmful, extremely dangerous, especially the rural agrarian community. They face the biggest impact compared to urban areas. It's the rural areas which face the biggest impact, especially farmers, the agrarian community, right? They face the biggest impact because water is absolutely critical for agriculture, for animal husbandry, right? So livelihoods, millions of livelihoods are dependent on water availability. So if drought hits a region, the rural life, the agrarian economy will be completely uprooted for many, many years to come. The impact will not last just for a few days or few weeks. The impact will last for years together. It has a devastating socio-economic impact. Amongst all the disasters, droughts have one of the most devastating socio-economic impact on the rural areas, on the agrarian population. Is that clear? So this will eventually affect your entire economy. If agricultural productivity is compromised, food production goes down, right? There will be shortage of food, causing inflation in the economy. That will that will destabilize the macroeconomic factors, right? So even in urban areas, the financial markets, they will feel the heat, they'll feel the impact. Nutrition levels will get affected, causing hunger, malnutrition. Diseases will spread. Education will get affected. So as a result, droughts, they have a widespread socio-economic impact. The challenge for the government here is that it's very difficult to determine when exactly the condition starts and when exactly it will end. It's not that there is a clear cut sign, since it's not physically perceivable immediately, right? You need to carefully observe certain parameters, monitor regularly to figure out if the drought condition is starting. So you have to constantly monitor rainfall and water levels and water availability. There should be a constant check on the rainfall that is expected, rainfall that is actually received, water levels in all the water bodies in a region, water availability, which can be directly used by the people. What is the extent of water availability? This has to be constantly tracked. Now, you might have read in newspapers right before monsoon season. Usually, monsoon starts by first week of June. By April, May, IMD starts releasing forecasts, monsoon forecasts. IMD will give an estimate as to how the monsoon season is going to be. Which region will get excess rainfall? Which region will get lower rainfall? These estimates are critical. Based on this, you can identify the regions which are going to get below average precipitation. So in those regions, the governments have to keep a close watch. They have to keep checking water levels and water availability on the ground. And if there is scarcity being reported, right, if the required conditions are being met, immediately a drought condition has to be declared. Is that clear? So you need constant surveillance, constant watch to determine when exactly the droughts are beginning and when it will end. It's very difficult to determine that. You can't say when it's going to end. You have no idea, right? This is beyond human control. Droughts can last not just for one season, it can last for a few years as well, right? Maybe, let's say this year, monsoon is below average, and in some parts of the country, drought conditions will begin. Let's say next year as well, it will repeat. The drought condition will extend again. It might happen for 2 more years, so 3 more years. So it might last few years as well. So that is the long-term impact. It has a very destructive impact in that regard. And there is no single indicator to identify that drought has started, that this is the exact impact of drought. Now, in case of, let's say, floods or earthquakes, you have a clear indicator in front of your eyes, right? For earthquake, the tremors are the indicator, right? What better indicator do you need? For floods, the rise in water levels and the flooding of the low-lying areas is a clear indicator. But in case of droughts, you don't have one such indicator. You have to keep track of multiple parameters to identify whether drought has started. All right. So one challenge is identifying when it is starting, when it is going to end. Second challenge is in estimating the impact. In case of instantaneous disasters, you can quantify the damage which has happened, that these many buildings were destroyed, these roads were damaged, these many people were killed. That can be exactly estimated in case of instantaneous disasters. But in a drought, you have no idea what is the actual impact, right? It's very, very difficult to estimate the impact. Farmer suicides might increase few years later as farmers are pushed into a debt burden, right? The health impact cannot be gauged. Several diseases will start spreading in a drought season because when you don't have enough water availability, whatever stagnant water is left, that will become a breeding ground for various diseases. Lot of diseases will spread in a drought hit area. So you can't really estimate the impact of the health conditions, the diseases that are going to spread. It's very, very challenging and very difficult. Children might drop out from schools because farmers, they may not be able to afford sending children to schools. Children might fall sick and they might skip schools and they might drop out permanently. So you can't estimate the long-term impact on education. Is that clear? So understanding and estimating the severity of drought is also very, very challenging. The spatial extent which is affected is much greater compared to other disasters. What do you mean by this? It means that the geographical area which is affected by drought is many times larger than the area affected by other disasters. Now, let's say cyclone. Cyclone will hit a specific place. Maybe few districts are affected. Correct? Earthquakes will affect maybe few states and many districts. Floods will affect a specific place within a district. Clear? But droughts are not like that. Droughts can affect the entire state, or multiple states can be affected by droughts. So the spatial impact, the geographical area which is affected, is much greater compared to your other disasters. So due to the difficulty involved in quantifying the impact, the response will also get affected. The governments may not even recognize that such a disaster is happening, right? The people themselves may not realize that such a disaster is happening. So as a result, the response will be affected. How you respond to the disaster, how you help the victims will get compromised. Is that clear? This usually turns into a political issue as well, because state governments, they keep requesting the center for drought assistance, saying that drought conditions have started, but center may not agree with it. So this will turn into a political issue between different political parties, leading to politicization of the entire issue. So that is why droughts have a devastating socio-economic impact. It affects the weaker sections. It affects the rural areas, the farmers, the landless laborers, right? The peasants, the workers, they are more affected by drought conditions. It has a bigger disproportionate impact on the poor people and the vulnerable sections. Got it? So please understand the varied impact of drought. Now let me explain the three different types of droughts which are witnessed. This is very important for your prelims as well. There could be a prelims question on this. There are three types of droughts. Essentially, these are three stages through which droughts progress. It's a progressive condition. First, it begins with meteorological drought. This is the first condition. As the name itself indicates, meteorological drought occurs due to shortage of rainfall in a given season. Let's say for one monsoon season, the rains have failed in a given area. The precipitation is below average. So there is some shortage of water in that area for those few months, right? This is meteorological drought. Now, if this condition persists for the next cycle as well, let's say in the next rainy season, the same condition will persist. This will cause a very acute shortage of water because the remaining water bodies will also start drying out. Even if rain has failed for one season, the region can still overcome that. It's still a meteorological drought. Maybe next season rainfall will return, bringing normalcy back to the region. But if that does not happen, if for consecutive seasons rainfall has been hampered, then it causes the second stage in drought, which is hydrological drought. You start witnessing water scarcity, acute water scarcity in your water bodies. Is that clear? Your dams will start running out of water storage. Lakes and rivers will become dry. So people will rely more on groundwater table, will overexploit the groundwater table, and even the subsurface water will get exhausted. So this is the second stage, hydrological drought. If these conditions persist for a few more seasons, let's say for one more year or 2, 3 more years, then you will witness the worst form of drought, the last stage, which is agricultural drought. In this case, the soil will lose its moisture entirely. It's a combination of meteorological and hydrological droughts. For multiple seasons, if there is a shortage of rainfall and if all water bodies are running dry, you will get to this final stage where you witness that the soil will lose its moisture through evapotranspiration. Evapotranspiration, all the water is lost into the atmosphere. You would have studied this in your school days. See, plants, they release water into the atmosphere through the process of transpiration, correct? Then through evaporation, water found on the surface evaporates into the atmosphere. So through a combination of evapotranspiration, that is through evaporation through soil and transpiration through plants, whatever remaining water is left, moisture is left in the soil, it leaves and it enters into the atmosphere as water vapor. So the soil goes completely dry. You might have seen these images, pictures, where the soil starts cracking. The soil cracks up completely due to dryness. So that is a soil which has become deprived of moisture. And without moisture in the soil, your plants, your agriculture is going to collapse completely. It will lead to absolute agriculture failure, causing devastating economic and social consequences. The lower caste will be more affected. Minorities will be more affected because they already are in a vulnerable position socially and economically, right? So the poor people, the minorities, the weaker sections, vulnerable communities, they will face bigger impact, that too in rural areas and especially in the farming community, in the agrarian economy. The impact is very, very severe. Understood? So farmers who own land, they will suffer economic losses. Their livelihoods get uprooted. Those who rear cattle, poultry, they will not have enough water to feed the animals and birds. So most of these animals will die out. Correct? It causes a famine. It leads to shortage of food, malnutrition, hunger, and farmers will stop employing labor. Usually, farm laborers are from lower caste, from Dalits, scheduled castes, etc. So if they are removed from jobs, right, they don't get their payments, they don't have any land of their own. Even if they have land, what will they do if there is no water? Right? So as a result, it's a chain effect. The whole society, the whole economy in rural areas takes a massive hit. This immediately affects our macroeconomic conditions, as inflation will shoot up, right? Food inflation will shoot up, and it affects the other sectors as well, right? Industries will get affected. Urban areas will also get affected later following these drought conditions. So that is why droughts are very, very severe as a disaster. The worst part is you can't feel it immediately, you can't perceive it that it's happening. But after a certain point, if you reach the agricultural drought stage, then no one will be spared by this disaster. This can be very, very devastating for the country, right? A complete famine is a it's a highly destructive scenario. So let's see what is the impact. Let's put this down in specific points. There is a very serious environmental impact that you notice. Due to lack of water, pollution will increase. Your water, whatever is available, will get polluted. See, water bodies stay clean. They naturally filter out the pollutants through constant flow. That is why flowing water is cleaner than stagnant water. So, due to water shortage, less rainfall, whatever bodies are remaining, the surface water, whatever is left, right, that will become contaminated. The pollution will increase. Wetlands will dry out. This will directly contribute to more forest fires, leading to significant loss of biodiversity and ecological imbalance. Is that clear? Many animals will die out. Your forest cover will start depleting, right? Birds, aquatic life, they will also take the impact. So, this loss of biodiversity upsets the food chain, it upsets the ecological balance, and eventually gives rise to various pests and diseases that will raise many health concerns. Is that clear? Pests, pathogens, they will flourish and they'll spread many, many diseases, impacting the health of the people in that region. So, due to the widespread impact on agriculture, it has a huge economic impact. Agricultural productivity goes down, fishing will get affected, right? Hydropower generation will come to a stop, causing an energy crisis as well. Tourism gets compromised because water bodies are natural recreational centers. Any lake, river, right, wetlands, they're all important tourist destinations. Tourism will be completely uprooted. Transportation through water, right, inland navigation through waterways will get affected, thus affecting logistics, movement of goods, movement of people. It affects the revenue for the government eventually. Water supply for key industries will get disrupted. Many industries have a critical dependency on water, like food processing industries, metallurgical and mining industries, pharmaceutical industries, sugar industries, textiles, leather. They cannot survive, they cannot function even a single day without large volumes of water. So, industrial activities will take a massive hit, thus affecting manufacturing and later services as well, and it affects the entire population. The social impact can be felt especially by the disadvantaged classes. As I told you, the lower sections, the poor people, they will suffer the first impact. Then minorities, lower castes, religious, linguistic minorities who are often neglected, right? Who are not as developed as the majority groups, right? They will start feeling the impact. Then those who suffer from various other multidimensional poverty indicators, right? Those who already have, let's say, pre-existing diseases, comorbid conditions, those who already have a existing economic weakness, right? They will be further pushed down into poverty. The increase in diseases will also affect the family's economic well-being, and it pushes them into poverty, and children will be withdrawn from schools. Their education is completely disrupted, right? So as there is complete loss of livelihood, spread of diseases, impact on education, Eventually, these rural families will abandon their rural home. They'll start migrating to other places, causing large scale migration, rural to urban migration, right? In urban areas, they'll come in large numbers and they'll settle down in slums because they have nothing else. They would have given up everything. They would barely have any assets for themselves. They'll shift with their entire family to find some job at least in the cities. This large scale migration can be very devastating for the society, right? Because these families will not have any ability to take care of their families. They'll be dependent on daily wages. They'll struggle to find such jobs in the urban markets, and this could lead to many other social problems. Is that clear? So there will be large scale economic distress. People will borrow more loans. Eventually, they'll go into a debt burden. They can't repay the loans, right? It could destabilize your banking system, your financial system as well. So I can't stress how devastating a drought can be. The socio-economic impact is extremely devastating. So that is why we need to pay more attention to such disasters. All right. Now let's look at the hazard vulnerability map of India. Let's take a look at the hazard vulnerability map of India with regard to droughts. If you notice, it's primarily the arid and semi arid regions of India which are the most affected. So, starting from Rajasthan and Gujarat, all the way till Madhya Pradesh, Maharashtra, interior Karnataka, Telangana, Andhra Pradesh, parts of Chhattisgarh, Jharkhand, Bihar, West Bengal, Odisha. These are the most affected regions by droughts. Have you heard of the Bundelkhand region over here? The Bundelkhand region, right? It it lies at the junction of Madhya Pradesh and Uttar Pradesh. Bundelkhand witnesses devastating droughts. In fact, droughts can be so severe that if it occurs repeatedly over multiple seasons, it will lead to land degradation. The land itself will get degraded. Because imagine when the vegetation is removed, when the vegetation dies due to shortage of water, the soil is exposed to erosion. The soil loses its nutrients. It would have already lost its moisture, right? So this soil, this top layer of the soil becomes completely exposed to natural elements. So under the action of wind and other weathering processes, soil will be completely eroded. This causes land degradation and will eventually result in desertification. Desert areas will start expanding. The degraded land will turn into a wasteland. Ravines will form over decades, over centuries. If you've been to Bundelkhand, you'd have seen those ravines, these deep cuts in the land. It's a result of land degradation, the absence of vegetation, and the persistent arid, semi arid conditions. All right, so the land will turn into a wasteland, meaning you can't grow anything in such soil. All right, it expands the desert areas, causes desertification as well. So, one more region which is very badly affected is this triangular belt over here, the Vidarbha region of Maharashtra, the Amravati belt, Amravati Vidarbha region of interior Maharashtra, interior parts of Madhya Pradesh and Chhattisgarh over here, then interior parts of Karnataka, northeastern Karnataka, towards Bidar, Gulbarga, Bijapur, right? These districts. Then these interior parts of Telangana, the Rayalaseema region of Telangana, some parts of Andhra Pradesh as well. Then this particular region of Tamil Nadu, All these places are affected by drought conditions in India. Now, do you know why this region of Tamil Nadu is affected by droughts? Can someone tell me in the comments? If you have studied geography, you would know the answer. Why is this particular region in Tamil Nadu affected by droughts? Why is it affected by shortage of rainfall? Himanshu says southwest monsoon. Okay, what happens because of southwest monsoon? Samson has given the right answer. Very good. This region lies in the rain shadow area of the Western Ghats. This part of interior Tamil Nadu, right? It lies in the rain shadow area of Western Ghats. So when the southwest monsoon hits Kerala and the Western Ghats, it will bring enormous rainfall towards the other side, towards the rain towards the rain bearing area, that is towards the coastal plains, the Western Ghats region of Kerala and Karnataka. They receive enormous rainfall. But the monsoon trade winds, they will skip over this part as it's in the rain shadow region. This part of Tamil Nadu receives some rainfall only during the retreating monsoons, only during the northeast monsoon season that comes later. Only when the monsoon is retreating, some rainfall is received here in the rain shadow region of Tamil Nadu. But if this retreating monsoon is also affected, then this part of Tamil Nadu witnesses drought conditions. All right. So please be familiar with the hazard vulnerability map of India. Now, coming to the last part, how do we manage droughts? How do we deal with them from a disaster management point of view? How can we streamline drought disaster management into our governance? How can we minimize the impact on the people? We can't prevent droughts from happening. Again, it's beyond human control, but we can at least lessen the impact. We can protect the most vulnerable sections. We can protect the farmers, the rural communities, the poor people. They can be protected, and you can ensure that the impact is as less as possible. So, as part of drought management, the first step is always risk analysis and early warning. Remember, I told you it's the same steps. The steps will exactly be the same for almost every disaster. Risk analysis and early warning. This is your first step in the pre-disaster phase. All right, as part of pre-disaster planning and preparedness, you try to study the risk, understand which regions are affected, create the hazard vulnerability map, try and implement early warning systems, which means again you have to measure rainfall, measure water levels, measure water availability, right? Keep track of other local indicators that could point to the start of a drought season. So these measures are very crucial to identify when the drought is starting, when it is going to end, and what could be its possible impact. Next, conserving your natural buffers is extremely crucial. If you conserve your forests, wetlands, lakes, and even the groundwater table, this will act as a natural buffer. Even if there is a shortage of rainfall, with conservation of natural buffers, you will still be left with enough water to at least survive till the next rainy season. So, protection of your forest cover, tackling deforestation, promoting afforestation, conserving the wetlands, protecting the lakes from pollution and encroachment, preventing the over exploitation of groundwater table, recharging the groundwater table. All these steps are very, very important to conserve your natural buffers. Next, of course, you come to your structural measures. Structural measures include watershed management. You have to effectively manage your irrigation infrastructure. You have to ensure that an integrated watershed management approach is put in place in the drought prone areas. Is that clear? You need to minimize water wastage, because when excess water is available, especially during rainy season, flood season, we tend to waste the water. But with better water management and irrigation infrastructure, we can divert the flood waters and store them so we can use them for a dry season. So we need to be very effective in our planning, in watershed planning, in every river basin, right? There should be effective planning and watershed management to store and conserve the water and minimize the water wastage. You need to promote efficient irrigation. See, traditional irrigation it's not optimal, it's not effective, because generally farmers flood the entire field with water, which is wastage of water. And farmers usually grow water intensive crops, right? They rely on water intensive crops like rice, sugarcane. They require enormous quantities of water to be cultivated. So we need to shift from these agricultural practices. We have to promote efficient irrigation like drip irrigation. We should introduce smart irrigation and smart agriculture, where sensors can control the release of water. Only the required amount of water can be released and automatically it can be stopped through smart irrigation and smart agriculture. Today, there are so many advances in agri-tech, in agri-technology. There are agri-startups which are working on these technologies. They're deploying AI tools. They're deploying satellite data. They're deploying Internet of Things and other advanced sensors to keep check of moisture levels and release water automatically and shut it off when it is not required. This smart management of water and irrigation reduces the wastage, right? We have to encourage our farmers to grow drought resistant crops. There are several crops, even hybrid varieties, which are drought resistant, like legumes, for example, pulses, millets, right? They need very less amount of water. Pulses and millets are much better alternatives. They are more nutritious as well compared to your rice and sugar. Is that clear? So promoting those changes in agriculture, right? This will require investments in agri technology. Now you look at countries like Israel. Israel is a global leader in water management, as Israel is a desert country, right? They have pioneered these technologies. They are pioneers in smart agriculture. They are pioneers in water management, in drip irrigation. They've also developed various hybrid crops and drought resistant varieties which can easily thrive even with very less water. Look at UAE and Saudi Arabia. They are experimenting with agriculture. They are growing wheat and other crops in absolute desert areas. Now, that is quite remarkable what technology can do, right? So, this is something we should implement as well. Better irrigation, efficient water management, and ensure that we minimize water wastage in the agriculture and animal husbandry industry. Because in general, agriculture and animal husbandry, they are water intensive. Both agriculture and animal husbandry are water intensive. But with better technologies and with better practices, we can definitely ensure that water can be saved, conserved in the agricultural sector. Next, another important structural measure could be interlinking of rivers. India is pursuing this ambitious project, right, to interlink the rivers which have excess water and transfer the flood waters to the deficit basins. Usually, the Himalayan rivers, they are perennial rivers. They are fed by the glaciers and the ice caps and the melting of the snow, right? They're not dependent just on rainfall. So they have water supply throughout the year, and especially during rainy season, there is excess flow causing massive flooding in Bihar, in Uttarakhand, right, in UP. So across the Himalayan belt and the plains of India, the northern plains, there is constant flooding which is happening in the river basins. So how about we take the surplus from there and transfer that to deficit areas, to the drought hit areas in the interior parts of, let's say, Rajasthan, Maharashtra, Madhya Pradesh, Karnataka. How about channeling the surplus, the flood waters into these deficit river basins? This is the strategy of interlinking of rivers. You can connect rivers by creating canals and embankments and dam structures through which you divert the excess flood water, store that water, and push it towards deficit regions. But this sounds great on paper. Theoretically, it's a great idea. But actually, in implementing the framework, in implementing this interlinking project, there will be many, many challenges and there are many risks as well. Is that clear? Because interlinking river basins requires a lot of engineering and construction work. It requires a lot of digging, lot of clearance of forest areas, requires some large projects like canals and dams that have to be built. So it requires a lot of money, a lot of capital, takes a lot of effort, and there could be adverse environmental consequences. If you're shifting large volumes of water from one basin to another, right, this could affect the aquatic life. This could affect the vegetation. It could affect the rate of evaporation. It could induce unexpected changes in various natural processes, which we can't even understand, right? So, interlinking of rivers is a controversial project. There are supporters, there are critics as well, but India has experimented with few. For example, we have taken up the Ken Betwa link to link the Ken and Betwa rivers to transfer the surplus to the deficit area. There are other interlinking projects in the pipeline. The government is very eager to take them up, but environmental activists they oppose interlinking of rivers on environmental grounds. But experts they do see this as a solution to help deficit areas and drought hit areas to overcome the impact of water shortage. So this is another structural measure which can be thought about. Next, transfer the financial risk through crop insurance. Protect your farmers through insurance. This will protect them from money lenders. They need not go and borrow from money lenders. It will prevent farmers from falling into a debt burden, which eventually pushes them to commit suicides. Farmer suicide is a disastrous social issue of India, right? It's a largely neglected social issue of India, and droughts are contributing to it, right? If you can protect your farmers financially, secure their finances through insurance, if you can insure their crops, their standing crops, they need not depend on these illegal money lenders who extract the blood out of them, right? Farmers are pushed into a debt burden, they're humiliated by these money lenders, and it's largely out of that guilt and humiliation that farmers commit suicides, right? This has to be tackled immediately. You have to transfer the financial risk. Then plan for alternate livelihoods. Don't let farmers depend just on agriculture, right? Don't let farm laborers, those who work in animal husbandry industry, to just depend on one particular job. Create alternate livelihood options for them through government schemes, welfare programs like Manrega. The Manrega has played a critical role in rural India in the last 15 or 18 years, and it has uplifted the rural population. It was a flagship scheme launched by the then Manmohan Singh government, and it's one of the most important socio-economic welfare schemes of the government, which has done wonders for the rural population, especially when farmers can't rely on agriculture, right? If they don't have a stable income through agriculture, they can rely on 100 days of guaranteed work under Manrega, where they get paid minimum wages or above minimum wages, which will protect the entire family. This cash transfer through labor which is provided in rural areas, right, has been transformative, and it creates alternate livelihoods. You can even provide additional skills to farmers, provide for skill development, give the farmers additional skills. Many farmers, many rural people, they'll have some artisanal skills. So work on it. Some of them might be good in painting, in embroidery, in tailoring, right? Or they might have other skills related to handicrafts. So harness those skills, give them better training, link them with the markets, create alternate income for them. Is that clear? This will protect the farmers from the economic loss. Next, land use planning as a non-structural measure. Even livelihood planning is a structural measure. Even livelihood planning is a non-structural measure, right? So promote zoning standards, come out with land use planning on how land will be used in rural areas. Protect the agricultural lands, protect the water bodies, right? This requires regulation of construction, regulation of human activities and human settlements, so that the land can be effectively used. So this requires strict policies and regulations on the ground, which has to be enforced by the local bodies and the state governments. You'll have to further strengthen other welfare schemes as well. Health related schemes, education related schemes, they should be given utmost priority. As diseases will spread, children will drop out from schools, nutrition will be affected. So you have to protect the weaker sections, the vulnerable sections. You have to protect pregnant women, infants, younger children, old age people. They will need additional welfare protection from the state. So all your schemes have to be enhanced, welfare schemes, more healthcare schemes, education initiatives, nutrition oriented schemes. They'll all have to be expanded, focused on the drought hit area, right? So then you focus on the response when the drought is occurring, right? You deal with the impact. Like if, let's say, there is hunger, there is acute water shortage, or if diseases have started spreading, or if wildfires are breaking out, you deal with them immediately. Supply nutritious food to the affected region. Ensure you provide at least drinking water. If not water for agriculture and industries, at least drinking water is a basic necessity, right? Then tackle the diseases with better healthcare and tackle wildfires. These are the response measures during disaster phase, in the second phase. And finally, in post disaster phase, you focus on recovery. You help the region recover from the devastating impact. Is that clear? You help in rehabilitating the people. You continue your welfare schemes, your livelihood support, insurance, compensation. This has to continue to bring normalcy back to the region, restore water supplies, and bring agricultural productivity back to normalcy. So, all these steps have to be taken up proactively as part of disaster management. Is that clear? So, this is how governments ideally have to deal with droughts, and that's exactly what India has been doing in the last few years. Now, let's close this topic by quickly taking a look at some of the previous drought programs that the government has run. I want to give you an idea, a basic idea about what drought programs we've had before and what are the drought initiatives we have today. You don't have to go into the details. I've given you some of the facts in the slides just for your reference, but just be aware of the scheme, when it was started, what purpose did it serve. Just the basic details, because there might be even a prelims question as well. So you shouldn't be caught by surprise. One of the initial programs which was specific to drought areas was the DPAP, the Drought Prone Area Program of 1973, launched by the Indira Gandhi government. It focused on some drought hit areas of India to effectively utilize the land and water resources, to protect the livestock, and restore ecological balance in areas where droughts have completely destabilized the economy and the ecology. All right. It focused on better management of water resources, soil and moisture conservation, afforestation, protecting and promoting animal husbandry, shifting the cropping patterns and agro practices to more sustainable practices, creating alternate livelihood options. So, all these measures were initiated in 1973 under the DPAP, the Drought Prone Area Program. Later, a second program was launched called the Desert Development Program in 1977-78. It just followed the emergency period. So, under this program, the focus was on areas which are witnessing land degradation. The arid, semi arid regions of India where land degradation had become a risk, desertification had become a risk. In such places, the Desert Development Program was implemented to restore the ecological balance. The focus was again to same to conserve the natural buffers, protect the land, water resources, the livestock, create some economic development in these areas where land has been degraded to help the village communities, combat desertification, prevent the degraded land from turning into a wasteland, prevent the formation of wastelands, because land which is degraded following repeated droughts and shortage of water, right, they can easily turn into wastelands which will increase your desert area. So combating desertification and promoting better practices with regard to irrigation and watershed management were the focus of this program, the DDP program. Now later, these two initiatives were merged. They were all merged into the integrated watershed management program in 1995. All right. We also had a wasteland development project, the integrated wasteland development project. All the three programs were merged based on the recommendations of the Hanumantrao committee, and the integrated watershed management program was launched in 1995. That is the brief history you should know about drought oriented programs. We had three programs in the 70s and 80s. One was the DPAP, next the Desert Development Program, and Integrated Wasteland Development Project. The three were merged in 95 to form Integrated Watershed Management Program. This went on for many years, and recently the Modi government has merged this scheme as well into the Pradhan Mantri Krishi Sinchai Yojana. So all these components of drought management, watershed management, irrigation management, conservation of natural buffers, combating desertification, all those programs are merged into the Pradhan Mantri Krishi Sinchai Yojana. It primarily focuses on irrigation for agriculture, efficient irrigation for agriculture, right? So these are some important schemes we have. Then we also have the Niranchal initiative that was implemented from 2016 to 2022 with the support of the World Bank. It's a World Bank sponsored initiative in collaboration with the Government of India and few select state governments. Few states which are more prone to droughts, like Andhra Pradesh, Chhattisgarh, Gujarat, Rajasthan, Odisha, Maharashtra, Jharkhand, Madhya Pradesh, Telangana. Some of these states were chosen for Niranchal initiative, where again the focus was on water conservation. Niranchal mainly focused on water conservation and water management. It is seen as complementary to the integrated watershed management program, which is under Pradhan Mantri Krishi Sinchai Yojana. So to supplement these efforts of the government, World Bank funded this initiative in most of the drought hit regions of the country. That's the Niranchal initiative, implemented for almost 6 years. All right. Next, we have the Jal Shakti Abhiyan. The Jal Shakti Abhiyan is a dedicated initiative focused on water conservation efforts to conserve water present on the surface. Around five major steps have been initiated, five major interventions, which includes water conservation and rainwater harvesting, where we can store the rainwater, collect the rainwater, store it, and use it for consumption. Renovation of village level tanks, water bodies, and ponds. Almost every village will have natural ponds and even man made tanks and water bodies. So, restoring them, removing the silt, and conserving these bodies to store more water is a priority under Jal Shakti Abhiyan, right? It focuses on creating a movement, a community movement. That's why it's called a Abhiyan. It's not just a government led initiative. Government will work with the communities, the village communities, to carry out these interventions. All right? It promotes reuse and recharge structures where you can store the used water and reuse it, or at least use it for recharging the groundwater table, right? So water, let's say, which is used for cleaning purposes, can be collected and reused for basic irrigation, right? Or at least it can be pushed into the groundwater table to recharge the groundwater table. So it focuses on overall watershed development and management, and as well as afforestation measures, because that is a important step in conserving your natural buffers. So these steps are undertaken under the Jal Shakti Abhiyan. Then we also have another program called Atal Bhujal Yojana that specifically focuses on groundwater conservation. Because see, we have over exploited our groundwater. In India, there is rampant over exploitation of the groundwater table. Right now, groundwater levels have hit dangerous levels. There was an era where you dig hardly around 50 to 100 feet, you would hit the aquifers and immediately there would be water availability. Today, even if you dig 500 feet, right, or even 600 feet, people are not getting water. The aquifers, the subsurface underground aquifers have run dry. We have over abused, over exploited the groundwater table. The Niti Aayog has presented an alarming report recently, a few years back, saying that in a few years, most of the Indian cities will run out of groundwater. And the shocking thing is that many places in India, many cities and towns, even rural areas, they are heavily dependent on groundwater for drinking purposes and even for irrigation. So conserving and protecting the groundwater table, preventing its overexploitation is very crucial to tackle droughts. And hence, there is a dedicated program for this called Atal Bhujal Yojana. All right. So coming to the last point before we close this topic and take a break, we also have something called as flash droughts. Flash droughts have become a common occurrence of late. Experts and researchers believe that flash droughts are increasing as a result of climate change. So what is a flash drought? Flash drought is just like your flash flood, right? What is a flash flood? We studied that yesterday. A flash flood is a sudden flood, a high intensity sudden flood which happens without much notice. It's much faster and more intense than your regular floods. Similarly, a flash drought is very intense, it is severe, and there is a sudden onset of the drought. Is that clear? When there is low rainfall in a given area, all right, if there is low rainfall, let's say for a few weeks in a rainy season, and if there is very high temperature, which could be a result of global warming and climate change, and if dry winds are blowing, and if atmospheric moisture has dropped, in such conditions, there could be a sudden onset of drought which can happen within few days to few weeks. See, earlier we studied that a regular drought is a long term condition that happens over a few months and few years. But there are instances where we are witnessing sudden onset of drought, where it suddenly starts, becomes very intense and severe, and suddenly goes off. This happens within days and weeks. The intensity and severity builds up, causing severe damage, and ends very quickly as well, just like flash floods. These kind of droughts are increasing of late, and experts believe that this could be due to climate change and global warming. The changes happening in our climatic and weather patterns in atmospheric circulation, right? In the rate of evaporation, they could be driving these changes, where low rainfall with high temperature, dry conditions, and low moisture could drive the occurrence of flash droughts. So studies have shown that many parts of India, they do witness regular flash droughts that will last for maybe 1 month or 2 months, and then it goes back. So these flash droughts are unrecognized. It's an unrecognized crisis. See, recognizing a regular drought itself was challenging. Upon that, flash droughts become even more challenging to recognize. They happen so quickly and go away that you don't even know it has happened. If you don't pay attention, if you don't carry out good risk analysis and forecasting, you can't identify these unrecognized situations which are happening. So, right now, there is a lot of focus on identifying flash droughts in the country. This has a more severe, devastating impact, right? So, it's important to step up our scientific studies, to improve our risk analysis, to improve our early warning forecasting, so we can monitor the country for such situations and tackle these threats immediately. So, these are the various topics that are important under droughts. So, whatever I've explained, it's not just important for your mains, you can expect prelims questions as well, because many of the topics are connected with geography and environment and ecology. The analysis we have carried out, the assessment, right, it will help you in your essay topics as well. There can be essay topic on water management, on water scarcity, on over exploitation of groundwater table, right? These are all connected topics. So please prepare for these disasters thoroughly. Don't think these topics are needed only for the small subject of disaster management. This will help you in other subjects as well. All right, I think with this we can take a short break. Let's take a 15 minutes break. Let's come back at 11:45. All right, let's come back at 11:45, and then we will look at some other disasters which we still have. We'll talk about cyclones, earthquakes, cloud bursts, right? There are many more. The whole day we'll spend in talking about all these disasters. All right, so please come back at 11:45. Any doubts and questions, post it in the doubt section. I'll take it up after the break. All right, so see you at 11:45. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the session. Now, first, let's look at some doubts and questions. And after that, we'll start with the next module. We shall start talking about other disasters such as cyclones, cloudbursts, etc. But first, let's answer all the doubts and questions. Chituri is asking, what is drip irrigation? Drip irrigation is a type of irrigation where water is supplied directly to the roots of the plant. There is a network of pipes which is laid in the agricultural field, and at every plant where it is planted, right, at where every sapling is planted, there will be a small opening, and this could be controlled. So water supply or irrigated water supply is provided to the entire field in a controlled manner. Instead of wasting water by flooding the entire field, limited drops of water is provided, whatever is required for that particular crop. So water is supplied through drips, through drop by drop irrigation. So that is called drip irrigation. Next, Himanshu is asking, explain integrated watershed management. As I told you, in any drainage basin, right, you take a particular river, for example, every river has a certain drainage basin of its own. In that entire drainage basin, the water, how it is flowing, how it is being saved or conserved, how it's being stored, how it is being utilized, dealing with all of this is your watershed management. So that involves building of dams and embankments, building of irrigation canals through which water is supplied to the agricultural fields, how water conservation is implemented, how we promote groundwater percolation, right? Even rainwater harvesting, all of them, all the water management measures which are undertaken in one watershed, in one drainage basin, is integrated watershed management. Is that clear? It's all about managing the flow and utilization of water in a given area. That is called watershed management. Next, Chituri is asking, similar to gas pipelines, water pipelines can be an alternative for interlinking of rivers. Am I right? No, actually, no. See, for interlinking of rivers, water can't be transported just through pipelines. Water that flows in a river is the volume is many times higher. You can't simply supply that through pipelines, through water pipelines. Water pipelines can't hold that kind of water. You have to create canals. You have to create channels through which the water can flow, the excess can flow into the deficit area. At some places, you may have to lift the water as well. You may have to provide for lift irrigation because water flows with gravity, right? Gravity is what pulls the water from the highest to the lowest point. So if you're moving water from one river basin to another, where there is a surplus, you're pushing the excess to the deficit area, you have to manage the flow as well. So at some places where the elevation is not right, you'll have to lift the water and then push it through a slope area where it gains enough speed to reach the deficit region. So interlinking of rivers will include all these projects. It's not just through water pipelines. Through pipelines, you can't supply rivers water from one river to another. That's not possible. All right. So it requires creation of canals, building of dams, embankments, lift irrigation projects. The combination of all of this is what we call as interlinking of rivers project. Next, any other question? Himanshu is asking, how does early warning systems work? I told you this yesterday itself. Early warning systems, they vary from disaster to disaster, right? But in general, it involves a network of sensors through which you are collecting valuable data. It involves some radars as well in case of rainfall. You have Doppler radars through which rain bearing clouds are tracked. Then you have satellite images, right? Satellites play a critical role in monitoring key parameters. They monitor key atmospheric parameters. They can monitor the surface temperature of your seas and oceans. So it's a combination of all the data generated from these sources, which is used in a modeling system, right? Where supercomputers run the data and they provide your forecast, your estimates. With regard to rainfall, this is how usually it is done. There will be rain gauges around the country that measures rainfall that is received. There will be Doppler radars installed across the country by IMD, to keep track of the rain bearing clouds. There are other wind sensors that track the movement of wind. There are satellite pictures which are used, right? Satellite generated data. So all the data is crunched through supercomputers in a weather modeling system, and that will give us estimates of how much rainfall might be expected in a given area. So for disasters like tsunami, the system is different. For wildfires, the systems are different. Landslides, the systems are different. So we will study that one by one. When we take up each disaster, we will discuss the early warning systems as well. Vishal is asking any example of a recent flash drought. Yes, in the last 2 years itself, we have witnessed few flash droughts in Maharashtra and in interior Karnataka. In the northeast part of Karnataka and in the Vidarbha Amravati region of Maharashtra, flash droughts have been noted. Anything else? Take 2 more minutes. Let me know if you have any questions. And please post the question in the doubt section so that we can easily look at them and pick them up for answering. All right. I think these are the questions. Now let's move on to the next topic. We'll be taking up a very, very important disaster, that is tropical cyclones. I'm saying it's very important because India is one of the most affected countries with regard to tropical cyclones. So, in this topic, we should understand the process of cyclone formation. We should understand India's vulnerability. We should talk about the impact and how can we manage these disasters. Right? All these points have to be covered in detail. A cyclonic system is essentially a violent storm that is generated over open seas or oceans. This is where your cyclonic systems originate. You need large open water bodies like open seas and oceans. There are certain preconditions that have to be satisfied. There are some preconditions that have to be satisfied for the occurrence of a cyclonic system. These cyclonic systems, which are violent storms, right, they can cause enormous damage. They have tremendous destructive potential. Because these cyclones, which form over open water bodies like seas and oceans, they not only circulate, it's not just a circulatory system, but it moves as well. The whole cyclonic system can move around and eventually it can strike the continental landmass. The moment it strikes the continental landmass, we call that event as landfall. So when the cyclone makes landfall, it generates very high speed winds. Wind speed can be in the range of 150 to 280 kilometers per hour. Such high speed winds are generated. These winds can be destructive. They will uproot everything in their path, from trees to loosely attached material, and even houses and buildings can be completely destroyed by these high speed winds. It will also bring torrential rainfall because a cyclonic system consists of a large volume of rain bearing clouds. It is mainly built up of dense rain bearing clouds. They will precipitate in one go. They'll bring heavy torrential rainfall in the affected area, and it could also cause a storm surge leading to coastal flooding. The sea waters will become turbulent. As the cyclone makes landfall, the tidal activity will also increase and the seawater gets pushed inwards towards land. So, near the coastline, at least for a few kilometers inside the coastline, the seawaters will flood the region, causing coastal flooding as well. So, this is the immediate impact of a cyclone. When a violent cyclonic storm makes landfall, when it strikes the landmass, It triggers high speed winds with destructive power, brings torrential heavy rainfall that causes landslides and floods. This could lead to landslides, floods. It could cause enormous damage to infrastructure and buildings, and it can even cause coastal flooding or a storm surge. This is what you witness during a cyclonic event. Now, the question is, how does the system form? What is the process involved in the formation of a cyclonic system? Right? That is something we should understand in detail. See, a cyclonic system is centered around a low pressure depression. If you look at any image, any satellite image of a cyclonic system, right? I suggest you Google it right now and look at a satellite image of how a tropical cyclone looks from the top. You will see a vortex. You will see that it's a circulatory system, right? You have these columns of clouds, large volume of dense rain bearing clouds that have assembled in a circulatory format. And at the center, you will have a gap. This center is a low pressure center, it's a low pressure depression. And you see that there is a closed circulation of air around this system. All right. So, the presence of a low pressure depression at the center is absolutely essential. And you see that the air circulation is happening in a closed circulatory system, and the Earth's Coriolis force also plays a role in inducing the rotation to this cyclonic vortex. There are some basic criterias, geographical criterias, which have to be met for the formation and the rise of this cyclonic system. So let's understand this in slight detail by using images. Obviously, I'm sure many of you wouldn't have got the concept just by this explanation. So let's use few images which shows the cross section of a cyclone and understand what steps are involved in the formation of a cyclone. But before that, please note down for your prelims that the circulation of a cyclonic system happens in an anti-clockwise direction in the northern hemisphere, that is above the equator. Cyclones that form in the northern hemisphere, they will be moving in an anti-clockwise direction, whereas cyclones forming in the southern hemisphere, that's below the equator, they will move around, they'll rotate in a clockwise direction. This is because of the Coriolis force generated by Earth's rotation. This is something you would have studied in basic geography, right? In physical geography. As the Earth rotates around its axis, a opposite inertial force is generated, correct? So this is the Coriolis force that you feel on the surface of the Earth. This force is felt on the surface. This is a counter force to the rotation of the Earth. The Coriolis force induces a change in direction to anything that moves on the surface of the Earth. All right. So in the northern hemisphere, it acts in a certain direction, whereas it acts in the opposite direction in the southern hemisphere. So cyclonic systems that form in the northern hemisphere, they are pushed in an anti-clockwise direction. The direction here is towards the right, towards the east. You see a opposite force in the south, in the southern hemisphere, that contributes to a clockwise circulation of the cyclonic system. So this is a very important fact, a very basic fact that could help you in a prelims question. Now, let us understand the process involved in the formation. Let's understand the basic steps. There are 4 to 5 basic steps that are involved, and I'm sharing an image as well so that it becomes easier for you to grasp and understand. See, a cyclonic system is essentially made up of warm, moist air. Nothing else. A cyclone is just a system of warm, moist air. That's it. This is the fuel which drives the cyclonic system. For cyclonic system to build up and thrive and to build up into a severe cyclonic system, it needs a constant supply of moisture. It requires a constant supply of moisture from the bottom. So where does this moisture come from? Where does this warm moist air come from which is fueling the cyclone? This is coming from the sea surface itself. The surface water is constantly undergoing evaporation. That's why in tropical areas where you have higher temperatures constantly, right? This constantly high temperature is what drives the higher rate of evaporation. So you need a ideal temperature as well, because the cyclonic system is dependent on a constant supply of moisture from the bottom, from the sea surface, right? This is the fuel for the cyclone. So this is entirely dependent on the sea surface temperature. You need an ideal temperature to be present around 26, 27 degrees Celsius and plus. So this will drive constant evaporation and it will keep generating warm, moist air from the bottom. All right. Now imagine a open sea or an ocean, right, in the tropical area. Tropical belt already has sufficiently higher temperatures, and once the sea surface temperature crosses around 26, 27 degrees Celsius, you'll start witnessing a constant rate of evaporation. So what will happen? The moisture will start rising up. Why does it rise up? Because warm, moist air is light. It's not dense. It's not very dense like cold air. Warm, moist air is very light and it will start rising upwards. So as it rises upwards, eventually it will condense to form a dense column of clouds at the top. These are rain bearing clouds that are getting formed. All right. Now, since this is a warm region, right, and the warm moist air is rising upwards, this becomes a low pressure area. This would become a low pressure point. Understood? As there is constant evaporation and warm moist air being supplied from the bottom, from the sea surface, the warm moisture is rising upwards, condensing and forming clouds, and because of the higher temperature present, it becomes a low pressure point. Now what happens at a low pressure point? All the winds from high pressure zones are attracted. In the nearby high pressure zone, right, the winds will start gushing from here towards the low pressure depression. This low pressure point is nothing but your depression. There is a depression point. So as soon as the depression occurs, the low pressure center is formed. Immediately high speed winds from the high pressure areas will start moving towards the depression. So as the wind currents move and accumulate at the depression, they are put into a circulatory motion. They're put into a circulatory motion as a result of the Coriolis force, which is present at the surface of the earth. So the direction of circulation is anti-clockwise in northern hemisphere, clockwise in southern hemisphere. So now your initial cyclonic system is formed. There is a constant supply of moisture which is happening from the sea surface. Clouds are forming at the top and winds are gushing in, forming a circulatory vortex. This system will keep building up over few days. Over few days, constantly the cyclone is getting fed, right? It grows in size. It starts growing in size. It will accumulate more clouds, more winds, and it eventually becomes this mega cyclonic system. All right. So this cyclonic system, which takes shape, it can start moving as well. Along with the clouds, right? The wind currents and the depression point, they start moving around. They start moving around and eventually they'll strike the landmass. So this event where cyclone hits the continental landmass is called landfall. Please remember this point. Landfall is an event where the cyclone makes contact with the landmass. All right? And as soon as it hits the landmass, the moisture supply is cut off. The moisture supply gets cut off. So what happens? The moisture supply gets cut off. It means the fuel for the cyclone is over. And as it is hitting the continental landmass, the wind currents will dissipate. They'll break from the cyclonic system, the circulatory system, and they will gush towards the land. The high speed winds will hit the coastline, causing enormous destruction. Trees will be uprooted. Houses, especially roofed houses, huts, then kacha buildings, which are not built with strong foundation and concrete, they will get completely thrown out. And any loose material, which is not strongly held, they'll all be thrown out completely, causing widespread damage and destruction. Then these rain bearing clouds, which will precipitate now, they'll bring torrential heavy rainfall. Massive amounts of rainfall is received in the coastal areas, causing landslides, causing floods, collapse of buildings. This is how it turns into a disaster. The turbulent sea will also be pushed inland, causing a storm surge. So, in the immediate vicinity of the coastline, you will witness coastal flooding as well. So, from buildings to agricultural field to coastal fishing villages, fishing boats, and any infrastructure that's present here, they could all get destroyed, either by the high speed winds or by the coastal flooding or by the heavy rainfall and the landslides and the floods which are going to happen. Is that clear? So this is the devastating impact of a cyclone. Along the coastline, we will have many key infrastructure projects. We could have naval bases. There could be seaports and airports present. Cities will be present on the coastline. Coastal fishing villages will be present, where fishermen would have docked their fishing boats, which is their source of livelihood. There will be resorts and tourist locations present, right? There could be pilgrimage sites as well on the coastline. There could be important industries. All of them will get destroyed. We could even have power plants, even nuclear plants. Now look at India's east coast. We have Kundankulam, Kalpakam, right? Major nuclear facilities of India right on the coastline. So all these facilities might get hit. There will be roadways, railway networks, power cables, telecom internet connectivity. All this infrastructure could get damaged and destroyed. Is that clear? Because of the destructive impact of the winds, the heavy rain, and the flooding, there is a high risk of severe damage being caused to infrastructure and property, and even agricultural fields could get flooded. Is that clear? So there will be large scale loss of human life. A lot of injuries will occur. There will be environmental damage as well, because the wetlands which are present along the coastline, like your backwaters, lagoons, estuaries, they will all receive high volume of saline sea water, which will change the ecosystem itself. The waters could get polluted because of heavy rains and floods. Agricultural fields, fishing ponds, they will all get flooded, affecting both the ecosystem and the people of the region. Livelihoods will get disrupted. Standing crops will be destroyed. Now look at the Kaveri Delta in Tamil Nadu or the Krishna Godavari Basin in Andhra Pradesh. These are main rice or paddy growing areas of India. So because of heavy rains and coastal flooding, these paddy fields will be flooded. Standing crops will be lost, right? So cattle could get killed as well. Fishing ponds will get flooded with saline water and it could harm the aquatic life. So livelihoods will get disrupted, they'll be uprooted completely. There will be large scale infrastructure destruction and damage. And as a result, it turns into a violent, instantaneous disaster. Understood? So, just to summarize, you need a large sea surface with higher temperatures for constant evaporation. the presence of Coriolis force to create the cyclonic circulation or the vortex. There should also be a small variation in the vertical wind speed for the wind currents to get lifted up. There should be a difference. A vertical wind shear should be present along with a pre-existing depression, a low pressure center. And at the top of the cyclonic system, there should be upper divergence where the air will divert and come back to create a closed circulatory loop. Now, please look at this image. This will give you a better idea. Look at this cross section. You're looking at the cross section of a cyclone right now. Here you have the low pressure depression that has been formed due to the rising moist air driven by constant evaporation. Right? For this to happen, you need a large open water body like a sea or an ocean where there is a supply of warm moist air through evaporation. So this would have created a low pressure depression, and the high speed winds from high pressure zones get attracted towards the depression. Now Coriolis force will induce the vortex, the circulatory motion, and the winds will start circulating around it. So as the warm moist air keeps rising upwards, for this rise to happen, there should be a wind shear. There should be a difference in the vertical wind speed. Warm moisture being lighter, it will rise up, creating the difference in the vertical wind speed. So easily the warm moisture will rise upwards to form these dense rain-bearing clouds at the top. Then there will be an upper divergence here at the top. This will form a circulatory loop. The upper divergence completes the circulatory system, the closed circulatory system, and this is like a cycle. The cycle keeps continuing. As long as moisture is being supplied from here, this system will drive itself. That's why I told you moisture is the fuel. Warm moist air is the fuel for a cyclone. So as long as warm moisture is being supplied through constant evaporation, this system will sustain. It will build up over few days. So it will accumulate more and more winds which are circulating with very high speed. It will accumulate more dense rain-bearing clouds. That is where it turns into a severe cyclonic storm. But all along, the center, the low pressure center, will be a region of calm. This is called the eye of the storm. This low pressure depression at the center, it's called the eye of the storm. And this is a region of calm. Here you don't experience the high speed winds or the violent turbulence which is happening, right? Whereas around it, around the depression is where you find the high speed winds and the turbulent activity being noticed. Now, hypothetically, if you were to be present here at the eye of the storm, you will not experience the turbulence that is taking place. That's why it's called a region of calm, the center of the storm, the eye of the storm. Around it, you'll have this violent circulatory system, which is building up, accumulating more clouds and high speed winds, and eventually it moves around the sea surface and strikes the landmass. The moment it hits the landmass, this moisture supply is cut. Moisture supply will get cut off. It will dissipate all the winds. The momentum carries forward and high speed winds causes severe damage. Right? Plus all the clouds will precipitate, bringing heavy rains, and the turbulent sea will surge into the coastline, causing coastal flooding as well. Understood? So this is the process involved in cyclone formation. So these cyclones, they primarily occur in tropical areas. They can form in other zones, even in temperate zones as well. But primarily, the cyclonic activity we see, it's in the tropical belt. That's between the equator and the Tropic of Cancer, and even slightly above that. And from the equator till the Tropic of Capricorn and slightly below that. It's in the tropical belt where you witness the cyclonic activity. So depending on where it occurs, it has been given different names. All right. So in different parts of the world, these cyclonic systems, they have different names. And I want you guys to make a note of this, especially for your prelims. This is not just part of disaster management, this is basic geography as well, right? So be familiar with the names of tropical cyclones in different parts of the world. This can be asked, maybe as a match the following question or as a direct, straightforward question. Now, if you look at the Indian Ocean, if you look at the northern Indian Ocean, the northern Indian Ocean region that includes our Bay of Bengal and Arabian Sea, here we just call them as cyclones. That's over here. In the northern part of the Indian Ocean, in this belt, they are just called tropical cyclones or just cyclones. Even in southern Indian Ocean, especially towards East Africa, this part of the Indian Ocean, the southwestern part of Indian Ocean, also witnesses tropical cyclones. So countries like Mozambique, Kenya, Tanzania, Madagascar, they're all hit by these cyclones in Eastern Africa, in the southwest part of Indian Ocean. Even here, it is just called cyclones. There's no different name for that. But in other parts of the world, like in Australia, for example, in Australia, there is cyclonic activity witnessed here, and here it's called Willy Willy. In northwest Australia, right around along the coastline of Australia, basically, it's referred to as Willy Willy. That's a different name, but the process, the phenomena is exactly the same. But locally, based on local cultural context, different names are assigned to it. Now, if you look at, let's say, the Caribbean region and North America, this is another vulnerable zone in the Atlantic. Towards the Atlantic over here, in the North Atlantic, in this belt, where you have Cuba, West Indies, the Caribbean islands, and the east coast of the United States, from the Gulf of Florida, covering Mexico as well, all the way till New York, all along the east coast of the US. Right? This whole belt is vulnerable to cyclonic activity. Every year, high intense cyclones strike North America and the Caribbean region, and here we call it hurricanes. The name is different, that's it. The process, the phenomena is exactly the same. Got it? So in the South Pacific here near Australia, it's Willy Willy. Towards the Atlantic, the North Atlantic, it's hurricanes. And in the North Pacific, it is typhoons. In the North Pacific, that is towards Japan, China, Philippines, and Korea. This region, this is the North Pacific, the east coast of China, the Korean Peninsula, Philippines, and Japan. They are very vulnerable to cyclonic activity, and here it's called typhoons. Is that clear? So these are the major cyclone forming regions of the world. There are few other places, but these are the major ones. So please remember this, very important for your prelims. So as I told you, the impact is very straightforward. You can visualize the impact. You can see the impact in front of your eyes because it's a instantaneous, violent, destructive disaster. The moment landfall happens, high speed winds, torrential rains, and coastal flooding is witnessed that causes loss of lives, death, and injuries, destruction of property. Houses will be destroyed, the buildings will be damaged, agricultural fields will be damaged, critical infrastructure could be destroyed. Right? We have a spaceport as well on the east coast, that is Sriharikota. We have nuclear plants, naval bases, seaports, airports, major cities like Chennai, Kolkata, they're all on the coastline, right? So they will suffer enormous damage. Then, apart from agricultural damage, there will be environmental damage as well. There will be destruction of mangrove cover. The mangrove forests could take the hit. The wetlands, the coastal backwaters, that includes your estuaries, lagoons, they could get polluted and it could affect the ecology of the region. It could threaten several species as well, animals, plants, and birds in the region could be affected. So cyclones have this devastating impact. Now, let us specifically focus on cyclones in India. Let's discuss about the phenomena along the east coast and the west coast, because generally there is a assumption that only the east coast of India is affected by cyclones, and you're not wrong in having that assumption, because most of the cyclones in India, they do form in Bay of Bengal. East coast of India is definitely more vulnerable as it witnesses more number of cyclones every year, and it also witnesses more intense cyclones, more severe cyclones. That's why there is a popular perception, assumption, that only the east coast is vulnerable, not the west coast. But this is incorrect, because even the west coast in the Arabian Sea as well, tropical cyclones will form. They do strike India and other countries, and even they can cause enormous damage. All right. So let us understand the cyclonic formation in the Indian context. Let's look at the northern Indian Ocean, and let's understand how cyclones form here and what's the difference between Arabian Sea and Bay of Bengal. This is also a very, very important point for disaster management, for geography as well. So, first, let's begin with the vulnerability. All the coastal states of India, maybe except for Karnataka to an extent, right? Even Karnataka is affected, but comparatively, relatively, it's less affected. But every other coastal state, from Gujarat till West Bengal, even the Lakshadweep Islands, even Andaman Nicobar, they are all in the line of fire. Lakshadweep, Andaman Nicobar, right? And all the coastal states. You can add Karnataka as well to the list, nothing wrong with that. But usually, Karnataka doesn't witness the direct impact. It might witness high rainfall, but cyclone doesn't usually make landfall along the coastline of Karnataka, right? But every other coastal state, be it Maharashtra, Gujarat, Goa, and Kerala, Tamil Nadu, Andhra Pradesh, Odisha, West Bengal, Puducherry, all of them, they are in the direct line of fire. So this is the vulnerability of India. Got it? Please take a look at the map. This is your hazard vulnerability map. The hazard vulnerability map. Is that clear? The entire coastline, including our island territories, Lakshadweep and Andaman Nicobar. But which of them is more vulnerable? Definitely the east coast is more vulnerable. East coast is more vulnerable compared to the west coast of India. All right? Based on historical data, based on the historical cyclones that have hit India, and also the current trend as well, east coast is relatively more vulnerable compared to west coast. We witness we witness more number of cyclones and more severe cyclones taking shape in Bay of Bengal compared to Arabian Sea. So every year, more cyclones are formed in Bay of Bengal with regard to the number of cyclones, and they are more severe as well. And more number of the cyclones here, they make landfall, meaning they strike the landmass, and many of them strike India itself. So that is why the east coast of India is more vulnerable. All right. But some of these cyclones forming in Bay of Bengal, they can recurve to hit other countries like Myanmar or Thailand, Bangladesh, even Sri Lanka and Maldives. All these countries, which are littorals of the same Bay of Bengal and Indian Ocean region, right? They could all be affected by the cyclones forming here in Bay of Bengal. Now, when you come to Arabian Sea, relatively, relatively less cyclones are formed here, Very few severe cyclonic storms are witnessed, and just a few of them make landfall. All right, that is the usual pattern. Historically, this is what we have observed. Compared to Bay of Bengal, the number of cyclonic formations is lesser, and the number of them which turn severe is also relatively lesser. And the number of them which hit the landmass, especially India, right, is also lesser compared to Bay of Bengal. So the cyclones forming here in Arabian Sea can hit India. It can curve to hit either Kerala, maybe Karnataka as well. It's possible, but it's less. The chances are less. And even Goa, Maharashtra, and Gujarat. Lakshadweep, of course, is also in the line of fire. But most of the times, the cyclones forming in Arabian Sea, they move away from India and they hit either Pakistan or Iran, United Arab Emirates, Oman, Yemen, and Saudi Arabia. All these countries are in the line of fire. Got it? Arabian Sea cyclones can cause damage to West Asian countries from Yemen to UAE, right, including Saudi and Oman. And Iran and Pakistan are also in the line of fire. So, this is what we have seen historically. But of late, there are some recent changes which are being noticed. There is a changing pattern in cyclonic activity in the North Indian Ocean. Is that clear? In the last 20 years, or maybe a little more than that, maybe in the last 3 decades, in the last 2, 3 decades, there is a clear pattern which is emerging. There is a change which is happening. In the Arabian Sea, we are witnessing more cyclones compared to before. It's not more than what happens in Bay of Bengal, but still, compared to the number of cyclones that were forming here, the number has increased. More number of them are becoming severe storms compared to before. More number of them are making landfall compared to before. Now I can give you examples as well to justify my argument. In the last few years itself, in the last 10 years, we have seen many mega cyclones hitting the west coast of India. The most recent one, Cyclone Biparjoy, formed in Arabian Sea, intensified over several days, and caused enormous damage to Maharashtra and Gujarat and even all the way till Rajasthan. Right? High speed winds, heavy rainfall caused a lot of damage towards Western India. Few years ago, Cyclone Okchi, it caused a lot of devastation to Kerala. Cyclone Okchi actually originated very close to Bay of Bengal, but it moved around the Park Strait Gulf of Mannar and curved back to hit Kerala. It intensified in the Arabian Sea, then hit Kerala, causing enormous devastation in Kerala. Right? So this is a new pattern that is visible. All right, please understand, I'm not saying the number of cyclones in Arabian Sea is more than Bay of Bengal now. No, that's not the case. Even today, Bay of Bengal is witnessing more cyclones, more severe cyclones, and more are making landfall. But compared to before in the Arabian Sea, you are seeing a change that is happening. Compared to historical data, right now in the last 1 decade, or in the last 2 or 3 decades as well, more cyclonic activity is being seen in Arabian Sea. It's more intense, more severe cyclones are forming, and many of them are making landfall. If they don't hit India, they will curve to hit either Pakistan, Iran, or West Asia. Right? So this represents a major concern. Now the question is, why is the change happening? What is driving the change? And experts believe climate change and global warming is responsible for this. Because see, the rising temperatures, rising sea levels will change every process, right? Wind circulation, trade winds, oceanic circulation, salinity levels in your seas and oceans, the sea surface temperature, All of them are changing because of global warming and climate change. So these changes happening in our seas and oceans and in the atmosphere obviously will change the pattern of cyclonic formation and cyclonic movement. So studies have shown that in the northern Indian Ocean, there are fluctuations happening in sea surface temperature, particularly towards Arabian Sea, towards the East African Horn of Africa coastline, all the way till Arabian Sea. The changes being seen in oceanic circulation and wind currents also are playing a role. So it's a combination of these changes which is leading to the change in pattern in Arabian Sea. Understood? Now, coming to the bigger question, why does this difference exist between Bay of Bengal and Arabian Sea? Why does Bay of Bengal witness more cyclones, more intense and severe cyclones compared to Arabian Sea? What is the reason? There could be a question on these lines. In fact, UPSC has already asked one such question. First, let me give you some data to show the difference, and then I'll explain the reasons why Bay of Bengal and east coast of India is more vulnerable. Based on historical records, we can say that Bay of Bengal witnesses 5 times more cyclonic activity compared to Arabian Sea. For every one cyclone in Arabian Sea, 5 cyclones are formed in Bay of Bengal. That is the difference. And that is quite considerable. So there must be some geographical factors which is making Bay of Bengal more prone compared to Arabian Sea. Correct? So we have to understand the reasons. And as I told you, the cyclones here in Bay of Bengal are deadlier. They become more severe. Out of 5, at least 3 of them will become severe. And most of them will strike the landmass. At least 2 of them will come and strike the landmass. So as a result, they are more deadlier with their impact. 58% of cyclones formed in Bay of Bengal have reached the coast. Majority of them are making landfall. Whereas in Arabian Sea, only 25% make landfall. Most of them dissipate in the sea itself, in Arabian Sea. If they lose the constant supply of moisture, if the temperature pressure conditions vary, if it's not ideal, the cyclonic system will simply dissipate in the sea itself. It will never make landfall, causing no impact. So in Arabian Sea, due to unfavorable conditions in general, most cyclones, 75% of them dissipate and die in the sea itself. Only 25% are making landfall. All right? But now the number is slightly increasing due to global warming and climate change. But in Arabian Sea, majority of them, almost 60% of them, are striking the landmass. Meaning they can sustain for many days. They will build over a few days, become stronger, become severe storms, and cause more damage and destruction along the coastline of Bay of Bengal. So the reasons responsible for this is the temperature difference that you find in the sea surface temperature. This is one reason. Please note down the points. Very, very important. Since there is a need for continuous supply of moisture for the cyclone to survive, Bay of Bengal, having warmer waters than Arabian Sea, plays a very, very big role in the formation of more depressions in Bay of Bengal, especially near Andaman, Nicobar and Indonesia. Around that region, the ideal temperatures are present during few months. So a number of depressions are formed constantly, low pressure depressions that will attract the high speed winds, creates the cyclonic system, and it builds up to form severe cyclonic storms. There is a higher rate of evaporation of water in Bay of Bengal due to higher sea surface temperature. Compared to Arabian Sea, Bay of Bengal has a higher sea surface temperature. So this is one primary reason. This does influence humidity levels, salinity levels. They play a direct role in influencing evaporation and the wind movement and the cloud formation. Because all the processes, the geophysical processes, they are interconnected. Right? And there's one important reason you have to note down here, that Bay of Bengal receives more rainfall compared to Arabian Sea. All right? Given the area of Bay of Bengal compared to Arabian Sea, it receives a higher amount of rainfall, right? Which brings a lot of fresh water. So there is more fresh water, which is relatively cooler, that is mixing with warm saline water. Let me tell you what happens because of this. Because of this constant mixing of cool fresh water with slightly warmer saline water, right? There is a complete change that happens in the structure of the sea itself, in the water structure of the sea. And don't forget, Bay of Bengal receives fresh and warm water. It constantly receives fresh and warm water from all the east flowing rivers of India. I'm sure you know that majority of our rivers are east flowing. They flow and drain into Bay of Bengal. The fresh water flowing on land is warmer relatively compared to the cooler water present at the bottom of the sea. See, generally what happens in seas and oceans, the water which is cool and dense, which is heavier, it will sink to the bottom. The water column you find at the top is warmer, correct? So there is a mixing which is happening. Of course, there is a heat transfer within the sea as well, within the water columns of the sea structure. The warm water above will keep mixing with the cool water below. Now, if you take out any external input, if you, let's say, assume there is a sea, there is no inbound fresh water or warm water, in an ideal situation, warm water will keep mixing with the cool water below and the temperature will slightly drop. The sea surface temperature will also drop slightly due to constant interaction between warm and cold water. But in Bay of Bengal, this is not happening, as constantly fresh water and warm water is coming in. There is supply from rainfall, right? Fresh cool water is coming from rainfall, but more amount of fresh warm water is coming from the rivers. The Ganga, Brahmaputra, the Meghna river system of Bangladesh, the Krishna, Godavari, Mahanadi, Kaveri, all of them, right? Multiple east flowing rivers are bringing fresh and warm water. And this prevents the mixing of warm and cold water in the sea. It maintains more warmer temperature at the top. And this aids in your evaporation. That is one reason why there is higher rate of evaporation in the Bay of Bengal compared to Arabian Sea. In Arabian Sea, we have very little mixing of fresh water. In general, Arabian Sea receives lesser rainfall, lesser fresh water, and west flowing rivers of India are very few. And also the volume of water they bring is less, right? East flowing rivers bring massive volume of water into Bay of Bengal. So they bring a lot of warm water that prevents the mixing with cooler waters, thereby maintaining higher temperature at the sea surface in Bay of Bengal. But towards Arabian Sea, the volume of water coming in from our west flowing rivers is less. We have very few west flowing rivers from Maharashtra to Kerala, right? The water they bring is not enough. Even though it's warm, it's not enough. So the mixing is lesser, right? That is, the mixing of our fresh water with saline water is lesser. And the warm water present in the sea will easily mix with cooler water below, and slightly the temperature will reduce. So this does not aid faster evaporation in the Arabian Sea. So this difference plays a very, very big role. All right. It influences all the other patterns, the circulation, the wind circulation, the formation of clouds, everything gets influenced from this difference. And another major factor is the wind movement. Arabian Sea receives stronger winds as it is more open towards Indian Ocean all the way till Africa and West Asia. There are stronger wind currents coming here which dissipates, breaks up the cyclonic system. But Bay of Bengal is more of a closed body. You look at the shape of Bay of Bengal, it's more of a closed body, right? Most of it is relatively closed. And the winds are not as fast and as strong as you witness in Arabian Sea. So this allows depressions to form easily and the systems to build up easily in Bay of Bengal. Whereas in Arabian Sea, The stronger winds will dissipate and break apart the systems very quickly. That is why most cyclones in Arabian Sea, they will dissipate and die in the sea itself. Next, there is one more factor which adds to it. The absence of a large land mass between the Pacific and Bay of Bengal is playing a role. Now, I'll take you back to the map. Please observe. You will notice that there is almost seamless connection from Pacific Ocean, North Pacific to South China Sea to Gulf of Thailand to our Andaman Sea and Bay of Bengal. You don't have a major land mass that can break cyclones. So what's happening is that there is an export of cyclones happening. Yes, cyclones get exported. Cyclonic systems from the Pacific, from South China Sea, from Gulf of Thailand, from North Pacific, they are moving across Thailand and reaching Bay of Bengal, contributing to more cyclonic systems in the Andaman Sea and Bay of Bengal. Please look at the map. Look at the map here. See how narrow Thailand is. Thailand is a very narrow country here in Southeast Asia, right? So you don't have a large land mass that's breaking the cyclones currents coming from the Pacific. So some cyclones that form here in South China Sea and in the Pacific, they easily move across Thailand and enter Andaman Sea and Bay of Bengal. So there is an export. There's a cross movement of cyclones happening, and this also leads to more cyclonic activity in Bay of Bengal. So it's a collection of all these factors. The temperature difference, right, which is a result of the changes happening in the structure of the sea columns, right? The freshwater flow, the mixing of warm and cool waters, they are playing a role in creating a difference in sea surface temperature between Bay of Bengal and Arabian Sea. Then you have stronger winds in Arabian Sea compared to Bay of Bengal, right? The absence of a large land mass leading to the export of cyclones from Pacific to Bay of Bengal. All these factors together, they are making Bay of Bengal more vulnerable. That's why you witness more cyclones here. Many of them become more severe because they get the ideal conditions to build over a few days and become severe cyclonic systems. And the way it moves around Bay of Bengal, right? They will strike landmass. They will hit either east coast of India, or if it recurves, it will hit Bangladesh, Myanmar, or Thailand. So all these countries are very prone, right, compared to Arabian Sea. But however, a new trend being seen is that in last 2-3 decades, even Arabian Sea is reporting more cyclonic events, and most of them are again becoming severe storms and striking the landmass as well. And experts believe that this could be because of climate change and global warming. Is that clear? So this is with regard to India's vulnerability. All these points that we have discussed, they are very, very crucial, very important. This is based on the risk analysis, the hazard vulnerability analysis of India. So now let's talk about the management of cyclones. How can we deal with cyclones? And what's the naming system which is also in place here? How are cyclones given the names, right? There is a naming system for that. And how do we manage them? How do we implement the disaster management cycle for cyclones? Let's talk about this, and we can wrap up this topic, and then we can take our lunch break as well. The first step is, of course, risk analysis. Risk analysis to understand the hazard, to understand the vulnerability. So based on this, you can understand the disaster risk of your country. Correct? You create a profile, you create a map. A very detailed profile has to be made to understand the vulnerability of the nation at district level. Then based on that, you implement early warning systems. The IMD is the nodal agency for cyclones. IMD is the nodal agency for declaring cyclone alerts. India Meteorological Department, it has sufficient technology with it. It has resources with it through which it can track the formation of these low pressure depressions. IMD has the ability to track them in real time. It uses ISRO satellites, the Earth observation, and the remote sensing satellites are used to collect vital data that helps in identifying the depressions. IMD will constantly track all the cyclonic activity that is occurring across the Indian Ocean, especially the northern Indian Ocean. It also makes use of Doppler radars and various other scientific tools, including supercomputers, to crunch the data and provide accurate estimates. Today, the technology is so advanced that we can provide very accurate prediction of landfall. Is that clear? We can not only track depressions and the cyclonic track, the path which the cyclone is taking, but we can even estimate the landfall, meaning the exact place and the exact time when the cyclone is likely to make landfall can be predicted in advance. Now, this has become a powerful tool in disaster management. Thanks to advances in science and technology, thanks to advances in meteorological sciences, in weather forecasting, in space technology, in supercomputing technology. Because of these advances, today agencies like IMD, they can track all the depressions in real time, identify the path in which it is moving, predict the future path as well, and provide the exact place and time of landfall. Now, this information is critical. If you relay this information in real time, give out the alerts to all the stakeholders, immediately you can order evacuations. Correct? The fishermen can be asked to come back. They can be asked to stop the fishing and come back to their base. Ships in the region can be warned. Aircraft in the region can be warned. All the key facilities, power plants, nuclear plants, spaceports, naval bases, airports, and seaports can be shut to protect the people and the infrastructure. Right? So, all these measures can be taken and people can be alerted. We can send SMS blast messages to everyone, all the mobile phones in the region. We even have a series of alarms that have been installed on the coastline, on the east coast. This was done after the 2004 tsunami. In fact, the cyclone and tsunami warning systems are integrated because since the threats are quite similar, but the technologies are different, which are used to track. But the alert dissemination for cyclone and tsunami is integrated. So after the 2004 tsunami, India invested heavily in tsunami early warning. And after the Odisha super cyclone of 99, we invested heavily in cyclone early warning as well. So in the last 20 years, we have integrated the warning systems, the alert systems, and you have a chain of alarms that are installed along the coastline, which will start blaring. And people are aware, people have been trained. The local people from the district officials, they have trained them. So there is greater awareness amongst the people today. After the super cyclone of Odisha, after the 2004 tsunami, there is greater awareness amongst people what to do when the alerts go, when the alarm starts blaring, when the messages are received. People know that they have to run. They have to leave that area, evacuate, secure everything in place, and move to higher grounds. For this purpose, structural measures are taken where the government has built cyclone cum tsunami shelters. At the district level, cyclone or tsunami shelters have been built all across the coastline that can accommodate thousands of people. During regular times, they serve as government buildings or community halls or schools, etc. But when the disaster is about to happen, when a cyclone alert or a tsunami alert goes out, it will turn into a shelter facility, which will be managed by the district level disaster management authority. So people will be evacuated immediately as soon as the alerts are given out. Next, you have to implement all your flood management measures. withholding the coastal floods, diverting the flood waters, conserving and protecting your natural buffers, especially wetlands, mangrove forests, and the tree cover on the coastline. They act as a natural defense, a natural barrier. Wetlands, like your lagoons, estuaries, they can absorb the excess tidal water coming in, the seawater. Mangroves and tree cover, right? They can break the high speed wind and the flood water. They can break the speed and protect the villages and communities. This is an important lesson we have learned after the Odisha super cyclone and the 2004 tsunami. All right, that's why in the last 20 years there is a lot of focus to protect and enhance our mangrove forests all along the coastline. Mangrove and tree cover, they are natural defenses, natural buffers that protects us against cyclones and also against tsunamis. The high speed wind, the floods, the water speed can be cut, thus protecting the villages and communities. Next, non structural measures like land use planning. We have to regulate construction and economic activities in the coastal belt through CRZ rules and guidelines. In environment ecology, you will study about coastal regulation zone guidelines, which is implemented by the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change. Right? It regulates all activities in the coastal belt. For a certain distance from the coastline, from the high tide line, few activities are completely prohibited. Some activities are allowed but regulated. So this restricts construction, human settlements, and human activity, and thereby protects the coastal environment and also minimizes the damage during a cyclone or a tsunami. Is that clear? These zonal policies or zoning or land use policies, they are critical. So CRZ rules, the coastal regulation zone rules and guidelines, play a critical role. Then you provide for alternate livelihoods. You plan and prepare for alternate livelihoods to protect the coastal community, especially the fishermen. Because fishermen might lose their villages, their boats, they could be destroyed. The cyclone could completely uproot the fishing villages and the fishing boats. So, to protect the fishermen in the coastal communities, alternate livelihoods have to be provided. Government will have to think of welfare schemes, long-term welfare schemes, and even skill development through which alternate jobs can be created to protect the livelihoods. Then creating structures which can act as retention walls or barriers to contain the floods. Japan is a leader in this. Japan is a global leader in disaster management. Since Japan is one of the most vulnerable countries in the world, it's hit by almost all kinds of disaster. Japan sits right on the Pacific Ring of Fire. It is hit by massive earthquakes, massive volcanoes, tsunamis, and typhoons. So, Japan has used its technological advantage and it has built such structures and early warning systems that today Japan has become a safe and resilient country. Even though it's one of the most vulnerable countries, it has managed the vulnerability. It has reduced the disaster risk by making the communities disaster resilient. This has been done with better planning, better preparedness, better usage of technology. So, Japan has put in place these retention walls and barriers along the coastline that can hold the flood waters or tsunami waves when disaster happens. This is something India should be doing as well. In the most vulnerable places, engineered structures can be built to retain the waters, to divert them and hold the floods so that the communities and settlements can be protected. Overall capacity of your institutions have to be improved. The disaster response forces like NDRF, SDRF, the capacity of your Navy, Air Force, and Coast Guard, right? They play a critical role in the relief operations, in relief and response operations. So we have to be very effective during the search and rescue operations and emergency relief operations. So the capacities have to be built up. Even the capacity of our district authorities, our district administration, the state governments, has to be enhanced to effectively deal with these disasters, because you can't stop a cyclone, right? So to deal with them, the capacity has to be enhanced, and there should be greater public awareness. There should be more mock drills, mock exercises, so people are aware what to do when the alert is given. They should know that they have to secure whatever loose materials are there in their house, in their neighborhood, and immediately leave the region to reach the shelters, to reach higher ground and take shelter in the cyclone shelters the government has built, right? So this requires awareness. So all these measures are absolutely essential along with post disaster management. Given the scale of destruction that will happen, the government should always be ready to build back the infrastructure, rehabilitate the people, and recover the region to normalcy. All right? The infrastructure which is built, your coastal infrastructure, should be made disaster proof, disaster resilient through changes in design, engineering, and architecture. See, every time you can't rebuild the road, rebuild the power plants, the seaports, etc. Instead, from the beginning, from the scratch, ensure your coastal facilities are disaster proof and disaster resilient. It is possible to do that through better engineering, through better design and architecture. You can secure your key facilities and critical infrastructure from repeated impact of these disasters. Since we know that our coastline will be hit by multiple cyclones every year, right? In the pre monsoon season, especially from April to May, in the mid monsoon season, around September to October, and post monsoon, around November to December. Throughout these months, cyclones are guaranteed in Bay of Bengal and Arabian Sea. At least few cyclones will hit India, right? So since that is a given, you need to make your infrastructure disaster proof and resilient, so that every time the disaster hits, we don't have to rebuild everything. They should have the ability to withstand the impact of these disasters. That is how you have to design them. That is how you have to build your basic critical infrastructure. So India has a strategy in place under the National Cyclone Risk Mitigation Project. World Bank also has funded the initiative with support from Government of India, and number of structural, non-structural measures have been put in place. Apart from effective early warning and alert systems, there is greater awareness and better capacity, and we have also created the required structures as well to deal with cyclones in a much more efficient manner. From building better roads and bridges to creating culverts, canals, and drains that can drain and divert the water, right? From effective communication, better power transmission lines. All these structural measures also have been taken along with non structural policy measures. So, this initiative is what protects the Indian coastline from cyclones. Just compare the super cyclone of 1999 with the cyclone that has occurred recently. You will see the difference. You will see the progress India has made. I told you yesterday, in the 99 super cyclone, 10,000 plus people were killed in Odisha. There was large scale property, infrastructure, and economic damage in 1999. But now, if you look at Cyclone Biparjoy, Cyclone Hudhud, then Cyclone Okchi, the death count has been very limited. Sometimes it is single digits or lower double digits, right? And the infrastructure and economic damage also is very limited, because that is the progress we have made in the last 20 years. And credit goes to the Disaster Management Act. Credit goes to the NDMA, the disaster management institutions we have created, including the disaster response forces. Right? It's an all round effort from central government to state government to district authorities. So, under the Cyclone Risk Mitigation Project, the prime focus is on reducing the vulnerability of our coastal communities to make them cyclone resilient, to build their capacities, create better early warning systems, train the local communities, make them more aware, ensure everyone has access to the cyclone shelters, build the capacity at all the levels of the government, from center to state to district. going all the way to the village level, to the coastal fishing village level. So these efforts that have been taken, right, that is what secures India today, and we are in a much better position compared to before. Of course, we can't prevent this, right? It's inevitable, and global warming is adding to the risk. So at least we have done what is possible from our side, right? We can mitigate the impact, the losses. So India plays a key role in helping other countries as well with regard to cyclone risk management, especially with regard to early warning. With regard to providing early warning, India is a lead country in the region, in the northern Indian Ocean, and we work with all the affected countries over here. We collaborate with all these countries, and we have set up a regional specialized meteorological center. It functions as per the guidelines of World Meteorological Organization, the WMO. The WMO has laid out some guidelines regarding tracking cyclones, naming cyclones, and also with regard to giving alerts to other countries which might be affected. Because, see, not every country can afford early warning systems. They are very costly, very expensive. You need advanced technology for early warning systems, right? You need supercomputers, you need satellites, you need Doppler radars. So maybe India, Japan, US, we can afford them. But Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Thailand, right? They can't afford these technologies. They don't have such sophisticated early warning systems. This is where India steps in. We lead the regional specialized meteorological center for the northern Indian Ocean with the other littorals, that is Bangladesh, Maldives, Myanmar, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Oman, Yemen, Thailand, Iran, Saudi Arabia, even Qatar and UAE. So these countries pool their resources together, and India acts as one of the lead countries in providing early warning alerts and forecasting for all the countries. So for the naming system, all the countries would have given a list of names based on their local language, local customs. They would have given a list of names. Around 8 names are suggested by each country. So you have a pool of names that are available. And these names are chosen and assigned for different cyclones. They go in an alphabetical order usually, right? So there is a standard protocol for that, for the naming system. And the names are such that the words are simple, even if it's in a different language. Some names are in Arabic, which would be suggested by West Asian countries. Some are in Persian, suggested by Iran. Some are in Burmese, suggested by Myanmar. Some are in Bengali, suggested by Bangladesh. Some names are in Sinhalese, suggested by Sri Lanka, right? Names suggested by India are Sanskrit or Hindi origin, right? So, like this, different names are chosen from different countries in the region, and one after the other is used for assigning the name for the next cyclone. Now, you might ask, why should we name a cyclone? What's the big deal about it? Naming a cyclone is actually very important because then communication becomes easy, communication becomes simple. You can communicate the alert more easily because without the naming system, scientists and researchers were assigning very complicated alphanumeric codes. Now, if someone says cyclone Biparjoy is approaching, you can perceive the threat. The cyclone has a name, it has an identity. If you read about some alphanumeric number, which no one understands, if you look at a technical name, right, no common man will understand that. They'll not perceive the threat. Media will find it difficult to communicate the threat. Government will find it difficult to communicate the threat. That is why naming systems are used. Even look at the COVID-19 pandemic. When different variants came up, right? Initially, a very complex sequence was assigned to it by WHO. People couldn't recognize that. People couldn't understand what's happening. So WHO came out with a naming system with simple names like alpha variant, delta variant, omicron variant. So when such simple names are assigned universally, it becomes easier to perceive the threat, understand the threat, to communicate the threat, and even to study and document the data for future analysis. That is why naming systems are important. So all the countries in this region, in the northern Indian Ocean, which are affected by cyclones, they are part of this specialized meteorological center, which functions as per the guidelines of World Meteorological Organization. So they would have suggested a list of names, and these names are used in rotation one after the other. All right. Like this, there are other regional centers. There are other regional centers for the southern part of Indian Ocean and East Africa, for the Pacific, for the Hawaii region, South Pacific, for the Atlantic. So there are different regional specialized meteorological centers which assign the names, tracks the cyclones, and gives alerts to all the affected countries in the region. Got it? So this covers my detailed explanation of tropical cyclones. It is a big topic. Trust me, it's very important for your prelims and also for your mains. So I think we can take a break right now. Let's stop the discussion here. Let's take a lunch break, 1 hour lunch break. It's almost 1:10 p.m. So let's come back at 2:10. We'll come back at 2:10 and we'll take up other disasters. We have few small topics like cloudburst, heat waves and cold waves, GLOF, right? We'll cover all of them, all the meteorological phenomena. And then we'll look at geophysical hazards. We'll look at earthquakes, volcanoes, etc. So by today, we should wrap up most of the disasters by evening. All right. So see you back at 2:10. Finish your lunch, refresh yourselves, and come back so that we can cover some of the remaining disasters.